Rudy Bunyan put on the second of his 2 jackets, one on top of the other. Because even though it was still late summer, the mornings in central Idaho were already chilled and almost frosty. Then he went to his father's bookshelf and, quietly, so not to wake him, selected a book to burn. Passing over The Naked Communist, one he thought might have some juicy scenes in it, he selected more or less at random and eventually chose Ride the Dark Trail. Then, holding the knob turned so it didn't click, he slipped out the door. Rudy made fresh tracks in the dust that paved the worn trail up to the small barn behind the horse stall. The horse stall had no horse, as the chicken coop held no chickens and the hog shed held no hogs. In fact, the only living animals behind the peeling house were pygmy shrews buried deep in tunnels below ground. Each morning, Rudy chose a book to burn. It was an act of purging or cleaning. His father kept them, shelved them, but he had never seen him read one. In fact, Rudy had never seen his father look toward the shelf that held them. His father rarely looked at Rudy. His father knew when whiskey was running low. He noticed when the cigarettes were almost gone, but he never noticed the books gone missing. Rudy didn't read, these books especially not yet. Rudy loved books because books burned so well. And so with a paperback tucked under his arm, he approached the back side of the furthest barn from the house. "Which one is that?" asked the young girl waiting behind the barn. Giselle Grace was her name. Her mother only knew strippers' names when she was born. Her mother also slept late. Grace stood near the blackened feed bucket waiting Rudy's arrival. Grace was her name, but they called her Brace, for the metal contraption attached to her right leg that kept one foot screwed to the ground and made a squeaky spring each step she took. It was supposed to make her leg longer eventually and let people know from a distance she was different, weird, don't ask her to run. So Grace, the beautiful name of angels, had become Brace, the earthbound. What's on the front? I don't know. There's a cowboy around a fire on the back and a cowboy on a horse on the front. He's got a lot of these. Rudy held up one of the collected Louis L'Amours and tore out the first 5 pages. They burned good, though. The metal feed basket was already half full of charred pulp. Few pages were only browned. The type could still be read in part if anyone had wanted to. "Do you think he'll start noticing them missing?" Brace asked Rudy. "No, there's a lot there." Brace pulled a crumpled half-pack of 7-Eleven matches from her jacket pocket. The barn, ringed in dead trees, had been baked in the years of dry summers and collapsed a little more each winter. Idaho had preserved and sprayed its treasures in heat. Idaho was a state as in love with its myth as much as its truth. But the tourists tended to visit the surrounding states, Wyoming, Utah, Washington. When the country thought of cowboys, they didn't think of Idaho. Its history was as distant as its fiction. The pages caught fire easily, as they always did, at first wringing the edges with bite marks, then spreading through sentences and chapters in a joyous dance. A hedonistic ballet of curling pulp and weightless black feathers, the 2 arsonists stepped back from the heat, towing the line of heat to the chill, still in the morning air. Then, Grace stumbled. The spring retreated on her leg and she fell into the burning feed bag of fiery pages. Rudy grabbed at her, catching her coat and pulling her back. But the bucket tipped, and the red pages, fresh with fire, poofed into the tumbleweed, snagging on the tiny thorns until the bush exploded. The barn sucked in the flames, inhaled the fire as it had been waiting for this moment 100 years. Flames swarmed through each crack between the dried timber, and the fire pierced the dark interiors. Cheatgrass grabbed at the flame, each blade a tiny torch, flared and passed to the next, spreading up the hillside towards substantial trees. Everything seemed to feed on the fire, hungry, voracious eaters of flame and suicide. Rudy and Grace abandoned the attempt to put it out. The 2 ran and squeak-clacked down the hillside, past the shed and the barns and the empty chicken coop and the house where his father slept in drunken haze of alcohol and ephedrine, on along the empty streets to Grace's grandmother's house, where they crept in with barely a sound and went downstairs to the darkened rumpus room. Grace pulled out some Barbies, skinny blonde dolls with long, perfect legs, and they pretended to take a vacation in the doll's colorful plastic camper.